Happy Thursday and welcome back to another exciting episode of the Rocketeer Minute, where each and every day, Monday through Friday, we go over 1 minute of the greatest adventure movie that Walt Disney's ever made, the 1991 Joe Johnston-directed feature, The Rocketeer. I'm one of your hosts, Jim O'Kane of TVDads.com.
And I'm Hal Bryan, an airplane nerd from the Experimental Aircraft Association here in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. And Jim, what a thrill it is to welcome back one of our earliest guests. This is an extremely talented gentleman, a scientist, a Renaissance man, a raconteur, if you will, and you should. He's an Eisner Award-winning graphic novelist, and in my world, he is living proof that if you stalk a celebrity long enough, you can become friends. So, welcome, Brian Fies, who I always thought was Brian Fies until a few months ago.
You know, I would think Billy Campbell would be enough evidence of how stalking can pay off for you guys.
Sometimes they stalk you. That's the best part.
That's right. That's what it's all about.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be back. I think I spoke in minute 4 and 8 or something like that, but it's been a lot something of minutes, like gentlemen.
It was back when we wore younger men's clothes.
Yes.
That's for sure. It's been quite a while now.
But we have you back for a specific reason. We're going to talk about the world of animation. Well, it doesn't happen through this entire minute, but we get into it about halfway through. Brian, as you are you're one of the greatest cartoonists that we know, or one of the few I know.
The designer of our logo. You've written things like, of course, Mom's Cancer, which is powerful stuff. An unsung favorite of mine, The Adventures of Old Time Traveling Brian.
Oh.
And which I believe I have number 2 or 3 of
it's a limited
45
edition.
or 50.
I only made 50 of them, and you've got one of them.
I sure do. And of course, one of my all-time favorite graphic novels. It's basically, I think, a 3 or 4 way tie for first place for me. In all seriousness, is Whatever Happened to the World of Tomorrow. We've said it before. We'll say it again. If you haven't read it, there's something wrong in your life, and this book will solve that.
Or
Thanks.
Amazon will, at least.
Yeah, Amazon will solve that for you.
Yes, Amazon will be glad to help.
Yes,
and,
that's why they have a one-click.
Also relevant to today's minute, I think, is I'm currently doing a webcomic on GoComics.com called The Last Mechanical Monster, which is a sequel of sorts to an old Fleischer Brothers Superman cartoon, and I think we're going to be touching on the Fleischer boys as we get into this minute here.
For sure, yes. It is epic and easily found on GoComics.com. And it's interesting. Hal and I both read it on its first go around, and it's in its draft stage. Now that it's in big time and full color and things, it's even enjoyable on reviewing. So that's one sign of greatness, is when you can look at something again and say, "Wow, this is fantastic."
Well, thank you.
It's very, very enjoyable. As we begin here, we're starting with movie time. No popcorn, apparently, in Howard Hughes' office, but I guess he didn't ask.
But as we said yesterday, a projectionist on call. And he's somewhere like in the ceiling of his office. He looks up and says, go ahead and roll it. Okay,
sure thing,
Howard,
Mr.
I've been
Hughes.
waiting for months for this moment, but now it's time to earn my pay. Let's see. I open the screen, then I put her in the projector on.
Yes, long before PowerPoint.
Yes.
But we get to watch a movie of some guy impersonating Hitler and some guy impersonating assorted guys in Nazi uniforms, looking at a man wearing a lot of cans and pipes on his back, and that man happens to be the creator of The Rocketeer, Dave Stevens.
Yeah, and you get one good look at him in profile as the doors are still opening to reveal the screen, and Herr Hitler is looking at him, and he's sort of standing at attention. And you've got a mix. I wish I were a better expert on the German uniforms. I used to be much more up on this, but you've got sort of a mix. I see some Wehrmacht, and Luftwaffe, and maybe even a Panzer officer, all of whom are interested in what's about to happen here.
I like in that glimpse of Dave Stevens that you can see, you get enough of a look at his face to see how he modeled the Rocketeer character after himself, and what good casting Billy Campbell was for that part. There really is a similarity.
Yeah, there really is.
Yeah.
Billy said they could, he thought they could be brothers, and I could see that.
And I think I just thought of this, but I think it works in the context of the movie too, because Cliff Secord could be looking at this movie saying, "Well, there's a guy who could be me."
Right.
You know?
It's quite. I mean, it's quite well done too. I mean, it has all the feelings of the 1930s newsreels and stuff. It has a homemade amateur nature. A couple of the Wehrmacht guys with still cameras and stuff trying to record all this. It feels like if you watch the movies of the A4, which is later known as the V2, the early V2 test, this is not that much different looking from that kind of footage, but very verisimilitude. Is that the word?
Yeah.
Joe Johnston really has that down pat.
He really does. It's interesting, too, the design of this thing, because it's all exposed tubes and everything else. It is so very clearly a prototype. And part of me says, the Germans would have had more style than that, even with the prototype. But it also says, you know what, they're in a hurry. And as you said, the early A4 missiles, the early sort of V1 tests and things like that. Now, that stuff wasn't necessarily all that refined until they really went into production.
Well, I was impressed in this bit about the blogofarg that Howard Hughes comes out to explain the problem he solved of the exploding jetpack. It sounded right to me. I'm Jim, you're much more of a rocket scientist than me, but the idea of I forget what he called it, but like a two-layered mixing chamber and all this, it sounded like something they would have done for the Saturn V.
Yeah, it would have been that would have been resolved by reading the writings of Robert Goddard, who came up with the idea of a double-walled chamber, which technically is what the thrust nozzle of the reaction chamber of a rocket. Robert Goddard figured out how to cool it is you run the fuel through it, and the fuel, of course, basic physics, you can't get hotter than the fuel's boiling point, so it cools it as it goes, and also charges it speeds up the rate of compression for the fuel that's going into the chamber. So it has a double purpose of reusing that energy to push more fuel into a chamber. The only thing that really bothers, I haven't seen a schematic for the German version of the X3 Cirrus, but the thing that bothers me all the time looking at Peavy's drawings is there is no oxidation. There's no oxidizer. It's like we can push more fuel in. That doesn't matter if there's not enough air to make it cook. But yeah, it does sound good, that whole idea of a double walled chamber. Which, if you like you said, if you look at a Saturn V or actually just about any Type J1s, or I can go through the list of H2s and things like that, but basically they all have the same design. The one that Goddard used, the one that von Braun used. You run fuel around the outside of a chamber, cooling it while simultaneously pressurizing the fuel that's going to be heading into the chamber.
I think about all the millions and millions of people who've seen this movie over the years, and I bet you're the only one who said it needs more oxidizer.
Dave Stevens might have, though. Yeah. I can picture him going, wait a minute.
He might have.
But it's okay. It's Disney, and it seems to work in the movie, so I'm not going to complain. He's got it.
It's fascinating too in the German design that just before ignition, there's a cut in the film, but there's an enlisted guy who comes up and flips a switch, arms the whole thing, and then sort of steps back in a hurry. So the pilot doesn't even necessarily have full control. And then is it just because that the rocket pack itself, the engine, looks like it's off center, which would really cause you, even just a little bit, looks like it would cause you all kinds of problems.
Well, luckily he didn't go very far.
That's true. He did not.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert, a second after we're talking, he blows up. Oh.
Yeah. I was just wondering if there is an oxidizer in any of those tanks, that the fuel and oxidizer might weigh different things. It's similar to my explanation for that is if you look at the lunar module.
Yeah, that's right.
You'll notice that the fuel and oxidizer tanks are different sizes. That's why that's why it seems to have like a cyst on its cheek. That whole left hand side is because the difference in weight between fuel and oxidizer.
Now, would that explain the sty in Jennifer Connelly's eye? At that point, was that the fuel and oxidizer different sizes?
There is no explaining Jennifer Connelly.
Putting that out there.
I think she's beyond explanation, as many young men can say.
Certainly beyond the capabilities of mortal men such as us.
I keep looking at this thing like, the flames are everywhere, and that really wasn't much of a flight. But I was wondering who was the guy that's flying it. That's not their chief engineer?
I would think that they would have recruited, perhaps against his will, a test pilot for something like that. Although it depends. Hannah Reich, when she came along, she was probably the most famous German test pilot of World War II. And she was somebody who would actually sort of volunteer and go after some of the more ridiculously dangerous assignments. I mean, she was the first one to fly as I understand, the first one to fly the Messerschmitt 163 Comet and survive. She also was the only one to have ever survived test flying the Fleischer. It was basically the piloted version of the V1, the buzz bomb. They put a cockpit in it in front of the scramjet engine. I'm drawing a blank on something like the 203, something like that. And the idea was that you would give a Hitler Youth 30 minutes of training and then put him in this thing and then tell him, honestly, you can totally bail out at the last minute before this thing dives in and explodes. And of course, it was a suicide weapon in everything but name. But she actually flew those and successfully landed them or successfully parachuted out of them, whereas every other test pilot who tried to get out of those things just didn't make it, and one ended up dying, and they weren't really employed.
Kind of picking up on that, the fellow you were talking about yesterday in the glider that had decided to put a 10-year-old in, and if a 10-year-old
George Cayley, back in the Yes, he had that was, I think, his chauffeur's son or something like that. It's like, you're small.
Here you go, kid.
Yo, peasant.
Pull on this, hold steady. Quite a long history of that. So they're putting it all out, and then of course they have. Is that a colonel that's coming up? I'm not good at Nazi rank, but I think
that's to your credit, Jim.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I don't think anybody's going to complain. But
I think I can tell Dr. McCoy on Patterns of Force. That's about the only one and he was made a colonel too. There we go. So it's
there you go. He looks like an Oberst, as they say.
Oberst, yeah, there we are. So he blots it out, and we're replaced by whatever the German equivalent of the SEMTI code is.
Yes. 7, 6, 5, 4.
That German paid off in high school.
Yes, it did.
So that was our initial. So they did have, this is just like going to the movies. They have the newsreel, and then they have the main feature or the cartoon afterward.
And here comes the cartoon,
yeah. And
the sunny, delightful little cartoon that it is.
Yeah.
And opens with those big bold words, Ein neuer Anfang, a new beginning or a new dawn, with the clouds and the sun behind it.
Yeah.
Just the aging on the film print is so well done. Everything about this animation.
Everything about this is beautiful. It's period or fake period, right. And it's just somebody. Do you know the name of the animator?
Yes.
It's Dindal or Drindle?
Dindal.
Yeah.
And
we have tried to find him, and we have not succeeded.
They did a wonderful job.
Yeah, the multiplane.
This is just beautiful.
The multiplane there with the you have the background of many flying commandos, the works there, and then we get the foreground slowly moving up. Beautiful parallax.
Yeah. That brought back happy memories of my brief stint in film and video production as a minor in college, and I built my own multiplayer camera and I rig, and it was like out of a broken window and some coat hangers and things, but trying to do this crude little stop motion animation and add just a depth of field to it by having, some things up on the glass and then a background on the table below it shooting straight down. And
one thing that was interesting to me watching this fresh now in 2017 was I found myself thinking, well, you could do that easily in Photoshop. And no, of course they didn't. They didn't do any of this. They used probably the same multi-plane technology that Disney used in Snow White.
Yeah.
If not literally the same cameras. Yeah. And I've seen these cameras in person. They're amazing pieces of technology. And maybe, I don't know if listeners know what we're talking about, this multi-plane technology, but it's the idea of it in an animated film. And I think Disney first did it in Snow White. I think that's what he developed the camera for, is you get this depth of field of a foreground, mid-range, background. The focus can be different in the foreground and the background, and you can move into the picture with real depth, with a real effect of depth that other you can't just get from a 2D drawing.
Yeah, it is stunning.
But these cameras are monsters. They're 2 stories, 3 stories tall, and you put different cells of the animation on different levels, like one at ground level, one 3 feet higher than that, one 6 feet higher than that, and you can literally zoom the camera down into it, or pan the camera down through these planes of cells. Get the most amazing effects. It's beautiful.
Yeah, it's like a really big Jenga. You just you move stuff in and out in between, and you can have the different actions happening at different depths, and stunning work that we're seeing here present. I don't remember if Mr. Dindal was a Disney animator, but I believe he was. We did try to reach out to him. He's a summer professor at USC, but unfortunately he was doing things in the summer while we couldn't get a hold of him. So maybe we'll catch him before the end of the show, or one of his students is listening and say, "Hey, wait, I know Professor Dindal. I can ask him to come on." So.
Because this is just absolutely spot on. And Brian, it's funny you mentioned Snow White, because one of the things that I'd unearthed in thinking about today's episode was that. Right about this time, so starting like maybe right at the end of 1937 and then into 1938, so about the time the film is taking place, Goebbels was trying desperately to get the rights to screen Snow White in Germany, and he was facing a real struggle with it because of just political tensions and things like that were mounting. But Snow White, of course, based on a Germanic folktale. And so these guys were big fans of the form and thought this is a nice sort of pro-German thing and wanted to screen it. As far as I recall, I don't think they ever did. They may have, but I know, if nothing else, Goebbels was trying for a while. And it's got to be something unsettling when Goebbels, the Nazi propaganda minister, when he's a fan of your work, what do you do at that point? Do you stop and say, is it me? Is it... I'm going to look at my work through a new lens and just sort of recalibrate here for a moment.
Interesting. I hadn't heard that.
The one thing that bothers me on this thing, and I understand it's part of telling the story, but I don't think the Nazis didn't think of themselves as the bad guys, so I don't think they would have used that kind of music in this particular... It would have been more of a... I want to say uplifting, but a more triumphant sound. This is
a little more Wagner.
Yeah, this is.
Yeah, you listen to something like "Entry of the Gods into Valhalla" from the Ring series, something like that. That there would be. It still sounds sinister.
Yeah,
but it's a triumphant sinister.
Yeah, this is more Night in Bald Mountain kind of a thing, and just
exactly. I don't know if either of you guys have ever come across a British sketch comedy show called That Mitchell and Webb
Yes.
book.
Yes, I was thinking the exact same thing.
So there's a wonderful sketch where they've got these SF officers sitting around, and one of them just suddenly gets introspective as World War II SS guy. And he said,
Yep.
Do you think we're the baddies?
Do you think we're the baddies?
Yes, he's got these skulls.
We have skulls.
Exactly.
We have skulls on our hats.
It is. Oh, it's so well done, and there's a group with a wonderful attention to detail too, because every inch of those uniforms is absolutely spot on, and it helps sell the sketch. If you just sort of put quick costumes on, it wouldn't be nearly as funny as something that looks spot on, authentic. So, and their segment with Admiral Dönitz as the new Führer after Hitler has committed suicide. None of that should be funny, but it is hilarious what they do with it. And his 5 minutes is Hitler, where he discovers to his chagrin that his only job is to call Eisenhower and surrender.
And I see you're giving your podcast listeners homework.
Yeah, they're all going to be looking up Dönitz, and there we go.
Yes, Dönitz and Goebbels and.
Well,
let me. Go ahead, Jim,
my question was going to you, Brian. So this may be up your alley as we're talking, but as we're watching the multiplane Nazi commandos flying across the Atlantic in all their multiplane glory. At the time, this is late 30s, which goes into the early 40s, and we were discussing at the very beginning of the show the Fleischer brothers, who kind of pioneered making rotoscoped movies, and we might want to talk about rotoscoping, but also this general look of this brilliant artwork in a theater. Could we talk a little about Fleischer Brothers and Paramount and things?
Exactly where I was going.
Awesome.
Jim. Thanks. But you talk about the technological innovation of Disney, but the Fleischer studios, Max and Dave Fleischer, were doing amazingly innovative animation in much earlier than Disney. Well, I don't know, in the 30s and 40s, which was also the time Disney was working. But they were doing amazing stuff that some of which survived and some of which didn't. Now, the Fleischer Studios did Coco the Clown, they did Betty Boop, they did Popeye, and they did a series of 17 Superman cartoons, which inspired me to do my webcomic, and I think probably inspired the makers of this Rocketeer insert as well. There's just some amazing stuff in here that looks like it was taken right out of some of the Fleischer cartoons in terms of just the lighting, the figure work, some amazing stuff. But the Fleischer Studios were tremendously innovative. They kept trying different ways of telling these stories. One of my favorite examples is it's sort of like the multiplane camera, except they would make a model of, say, a town and a landscape and put it on a giant turntable, I don't know, a 6-8 foot diameter turntable, and spin it and photograph it, and then use the photographs as the background for their animation, so that as the characters are walking down a road or driving in a car, you'd see this 3D model going behind them as if they were going down the road. It's a weird effect. I don't think anybody else ever did it since, but it's just beautiful and clever, and kudos to them for even trying something like that. It must have been incredibly expensive to do things like that.
It's stunning that, and you're thinking that they're shooting this from 16 to 24 frames a second. I don't think they ever got up to 24, but the amount of artwork that they had to do just to get out a 4 to 11 minute movie, it's astonishing how much work went into these things. One of the scenes that we're watching in this is the United States flag in flames falling, and there's a lot of complicated fluid motion of the flag twisting and turning. And I think this is giving us a short, maybe a 2-second example of a technique called rotoscoping, where you take an...
I think it must be rotoscoping.
Yeah, so fluid.
What you do is you take an actual... It's very difficult to animate these things by hand unless you're really good at physics, there were cartoonists that knew how to do this thing. These things, Robert McKimson is one of them. But this particular one, what happens is they shoot an actual picture of a waving flag. You put it in wind, you film it in slow motion. Take the actual photographs together, the individual frames, you blow them up into stills, put a sheet of acetate over them, and trace it. And once you trace it, then you paint it and photograph it in on your animation stand, and turn that photograph into a moving cartoon image. This is known as rotoscoping, as you're just rotoring, making marks. You're making marks on an acetate sheet to create an image. And this is a fine example of it. I'm assuming it's a little too early for computers. It's 1991, and I think they just did this by hand.
I agree. It must be rotoscoping, and it is well done. It's a technique that was real common from the very earliest days of animation. One of the very first animators of my all-time favorite comic strip artist, Winsor McCay, did rotoscoping. He did a comic character called Little Nemo for the comic strips. Great big beautiful comic strips in the paper. Well, he made an animated film of Little Nemo, and to make it, he shot a movie of a boy in costume, exactly as you described. The boy comes out on stage, he does a little dance, he gives a nice bow, and Winsor McCay took each frame of that movie, traced it onto, at the time, paper. He didn't use acetate. They didn't use the transparent acetate. He traced each frame of film onto a piece of rice paper, put those all together, and you've got an uncannily accurate cartoon of a little boy coming out on stage and dancing and bowing. Disney rotoscoped as well. There's some famous scenes, like the first one that comes to mind is when Snow White is dancing with the dwarves, and she does a really nice little jig with the dwarves. That was a lot of rotoscoping. They put an actress on a soundstage with some short people, and they had her dance around, and they essentially traced drawings of the film of her dancing. Now, what Disney discovered, as I understand it, is that if you just trace the photographs of a figure in motion, it looks stiff and unnatural. So you have to take the film and use it as a reference, but exaggerate it and animate it and make it just slightly unreal to make it look real. It's an interesting thing. It's not as simple as just shooting something and tracing the pictures. If you do that, it doesn't look good.
It's really interesting because when you watch the Fleischer Superman stuff, like you started with as your prequel to The Last Mechanical Monster.
Yeah.
You just know immediately, even if you don't know anything about the techniques that went into it, it was at least aware of rotoscoping and things like this, you instantly see that this is a very different form of animation. There's a fluidity to it, but it sticks with you somehow. It jumps out as immediately. This is different from what you're used to seeing, from that era or any other.
Well, I love these Fleischer Superman cartoons, all 17 of them, and they had a big influence on Dave Stevens when he was creating the Rocketeer, and they had some influence that's very evident to me in this film within the Rocketeer. But my favorite story about the Fleischer Superman cartoons is, we're talking 1939. Superman had really just come out, and apparently had become a pretty immediate hit. Paramount Studios wants to make Superman cartoons. They go to Fleischer Studios, and Fleischer's not interested in making Superman cartoons. So they quote Paramount a ridiculous price, like $100,000 an episode, which in 1939-40 was like a $2 million. Just a ridiculous price. And Paramount says, okay, go ahead. Wow. So now Fleischer's stuck. They've got this job that they didn't want in the first place, but they've got a budget of tens of thousands of dollars, and they just said, all right, let's go for it. Let's make the prettiest cartoons we can. These are 7-8 minute shorts that were shown theatrically before movies, And they are still, to this day, recognized as some of the most beautiful animation ever done. You see a lot of their influence on, if you're familiar with Batman the Animated Series and Superman the Animated Series, particularly the Batman series, though, that came out in the 90s with Paul Dini and Bruce Timm. Man, that's just lifted straight out of those Superman cartoons from 1940, 41, 42.
And as we're recording this, they've actually just released another film in that style and in that universe. The Batman and Harley Quinn animated picture has just come out. It's Paul Dini in it. It very much goes right back to that animated series of the 90s, which to me might as well have been from the 30s or 40s.
It's beautiful, and all that work comes straight out of what the Fleischers were doing in 1940.
It is amazing, and there's been recent reconstructions of the original Paramount prints. So seeing them now, you can see them in all their original Technicolor glory. The saturation of colors is fantastic. The whole palette. We've talked about this before, Brian, but most of our views on color of good and evil and things like that comes from those Fleischer cartoons, expanding on the original work by Joe Siegel and getting the primaries for Superman and for Lois and stuff like that, and the bad guys wearing the secondary colors. It's fantastic seeing it now, and we're fortunate to live in an age where you can restore films back to their near original quality.
Yeah, Warner Brothers recently digitally remastered them, probably better than original quality, frankly, if you think about what a print would have gone through, shown up in a theater in 1940-41. So they're remastered, they're available on YouTube, and they are public domain. Superman isn't public domain, but these cartoons are. So for a long time, you could find really bad prints of them in the dollar bin at Walmart. But now they're beautiful, and frankly, or honestly, that's why I could get away with doing a sequel to the cartoon with my webcomic. My webcomic doesn't have Superman or Lois Lane or the Daily Planet in it, but it has characters from these cartoons in it, because these cartoons fell in the public domain. They're beautiful. Look them up. Very, very much worth a look.
Yeah. Did they just forget to fill out a form or something, or any idea how they fell through?
Well, Fleischer. Yeah, copyright law has changed a lot since the first half of the 20th century, and it used to be something you would have to renew. And the Fleischer studios fell apart in the 40s, and there was, as I understand it, maybe off base on this, but as I understand it, there was no legal entity that continued to look after their properties. So things like Superman, Coco the Clown, Betty Boop, not Popeye, because Popeye had other owners, but these maybe Betty Boop too, but a lot of these characters, a lot of these films that the Fleischer brothers made in the 30s and 40s just fell into public domain sometime in the mid-50s. So when we were all growing up, the three of us are all about the same age, these are the kind of cartoons you'd see at 6 a.m. on a Sunday morning on the UHF channel, on channel 36. Right. This is what you'd be watching, because they cost the TV stations nothing to acquire.
Wow.
Right. Now, for me in San Francisco, it was Channel 44, but otherwise, yes, exactly.
Yeah, back in New Jersey, it was Channel 11 for me. It was.
Yeah, exactly.
But I keep thinking that's also explains a lot of why so many of these characters appear at the very end of Roger Rabbit, because there's nobody there to pick up a paycheck for the residuals.
Yes. Yep.
The whole smile, smile scene there with the trees and.
But we're here to talk about the Rocketeer, not the Superman cartoons. But I gotta say, look up the Superman cartoons. So much was invented. The Superman flew for the first time in the Fleischer cartoons. He didn't fly in the comic books until the Fleischer brothers made a comic or a cartoon of him flying, because they thought he looked stupid jumping. So they made him fly, and the comic book people said, "All right." The Fleischer cartoons are the first time Superman changes costume in a phone booth.
Yeah.
All these things that we sort of associate with the iconography of Superman came right out of these 17 cartoons. So they're a lot of fun to watch.
No, it is stunning and well worth anybody's time. One of the things that another offshoot of this reminds me of Sky Captain: The World of Tomorrow, which was an interesting interesting variation on these mechanical monsters that are from the Fleischers that you've riffed on, basically. So it was an interesting different riff there.
Yeah, well, and so does this Rocketeer movie, by the way, the film within the film. When you have these armies, these squadrons of Rocketeers flying through the Germanic sunset toward New York, that's a Fleischer image. That's the Fleischers' mechanical monsters storming the city, which was also what you saw in Sky Captain: The World of Tomorrow. Sky Captain: The World of Tomorrow was a very pointed and deliberate homage to these Fleischer cartoons.
And Jim, I would do that podcast. I would do the Sky Captain Minute. Like that would be an interesting one.
I think that movie is about 160 minutes long.
Okay.
So
I didn't say I was going to do it tonight. I just.
I might meet you at the. I might meet you on the other side. I'll come up in the credits if you want to get to the lens cap part. I'll get there.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, spoilers. Never mind.
Yes.
One of the things that I wonder about when I watch this is who's the audience? Who are they going to show this to? Are they showing this to the German citizenry? Is this for the army? Or who do you think the audience?
I wondered that too. They make the comment, Howard Hughes says a man died to get this out of Germany, and yet it looks like something that would have been shown before a Saturday matinee.
So I guess they were promising something that didn't exist yet. That's why they wanted to get their hands on the X3. But yeah, I don't understand. Or maybe they just were talking about the first part of this. Or no, I'm sorry. It was when the animation started. A man died. I don't know. It's all a mystery, but it helped tell the story. And we'll be seeing the end of this tomorrow. Brian won't be with us, but Brian, thank you so much for being with us on this part. It's always great talking with you and having you. You are one of the creators of this show. At least you did bring Hal and me together to chat for endless half hours.
So it's one of my proudest moments.
And it'll live on forever and ever. So please, if you are interested in Brian Fies' work, and I don't know why you wouldn't be interested in him because he talks about all parts of human nature and technology and science, check out Amazon. Just type in Brian Fies in the search bar, and a pile of stuff will come up in there, the things that you need to catch up on. So check that out, please. Or check Go Comics, and you can read some of his later stuff right there for free every day and comment on it. There's even commentary. I have to say as well, when my dad was suffering from mesothelioma type of cancer, I had just gotten a copy of your book when he had been diagnosed, and the parallels in it, I guess, with anybody facing a major disease, and I think not just cancer, but any kind of a major life-threatening disease, you can find there's so much in there about family dynamics, mixed emotions, dealing with medical professionals, how medical professionals have to deal with families. There's so many aspects of that I'm sure you must get letters all the time from people who have found their parts of their own life in your book.
Yeah, what people say is it's the details are all different, but it's like you were in our living room watching us, and that's about the best compliment you can get. And I really appreciate you saying that. I've done other work, and I hope to do more work, but if I never did anything except Mom's Cancer, I could be very, very content with that. I think that's I'm proud of that.
Well, you do good work, and thanks for sharing
you.
with us. Well, anyway, we'll get back to more cartoon Nazis tomorrow here on. But yeah, we'll talk about this. If you all would like to talk about this to us, we are available on many social media things. Oh, by the way, I'm getting a lot of mail, and we have misidentified one of Eddie Valentine's henchmen. We've been saying it's Mike when actually it's Rusty. And yes, we know it's Mike and it's Rusty and not Mike. So just to let you know, we do read your mail, and you can tell us. And we may, since some of these are recorded out of order, we may say Mike again when we actually mean Rusty. So listen for Mike, but hear Rusty. But we know that you share these things with us because you love the show. So thank you very much for your attentiveness and listening to our failures. My grandmother used to say even the Pope has an eraser on his pencil. So there you go. But you can reach out to us kindly at all the different social media. Find us on Twitter, Rocketeer Minute. Find us on Facebook, facebook.com/Rocketeer Minute. Find us on the big site, rocketeerminute.com. Where you can read all these previous episodes, go buy cool swag like Brian's books from Amazon, and find out about things that we're doing in the future. One of which is, by the way, if you're not doing anything next, or if you're listening to this on time and not in the distant past, join us August 26th, Saturday, 2017 in Chicago, where we'll be part of the Movies by Minutes Chicago group. Actually, go to moviesbyminutes.com/chicago and get tickets and more information. In any case, please join us here tomorrow as we talk a little bit more about Nazi cartoons here on the Rocketeer Minute. So until next time, over and out.